If you just joined us, I'm Sal Vella, and we're talking with author and professor of history at Bentley College, Joyce Malcom. And we're talking about her recent and riveting book, Guns and Violence. And can guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens actually be a deterrent to crime and violence? And Professor, let me ask you this question. Isn't it vitally important to make a clear distinction between violent criminals and law-abiding citizens when we talk about this very sensitive, delicate issue? Yes, it is.
It is. And I think people have gotten used to this theory that somehow if you have a gun in your home, you're going to, if there's an argument between a husband and wife, someone will reach for the gun, that ordinarily peaceful people will go nuts if there's a gun there. And in fact, that isn't the case, because in most domestic shootings, there's a long history of violence up to the time that occurs, so it tends to be the result of a long pattern of violence in something like 90% of cases. Mm-hmm. So I think most law-abiding citizens tend to be extraordinarily responsible. In this country, there are 33 states that now have concealed carry laws, which means that any law-abiding citizen can get a certificate to carry a concealed weapon, not just a weapon, but concealed. And yet, for 9 consecutive years, our rate of violent crime has gone down. So state by state, they've opted for the idea that letting law-abiding citizens have weapons is a deterrent. Mm-hmm. And now 2/3 of the states have, in fact, endorsed that.
And you are an advocate of what?
I think people ought to have a right to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. I don't think that that felons should have guns, and I think that some kind of a check is fair, and that people should know how to use them. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that police forces can ever protect everyone. And in fact, there are legal cases in which, when they haven't come to someone's aid, they've been sued, and the courts have decided that there's no obligation on the part of the police to protect any one individual. They're supposed to protect all of us, but they aren't obliged to protect or liable to protect anyone. So I think that you have to give people some scope to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm. How damaging and divisive is it when that distinction isn't made?
Between the law... Well,
between law-abiding citizens and
that's what the British
criminals
have done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have said that they can't let law-abiding citizens have firearms because then criminals will get to have them, mm-hmm. or they will steal them. And you can't even have a toy gun now if they have their way, because a criminal might also have a toy gun, and he might misuse it. So the fact you could use a toy gun to protect yourself, and clearly it's not going to harm anybody, doesn't matter, because that whole class of, it's hard to even call it a weapon, that whole class of instrument is taken away from everybody. And of course what it boils down to is that, the criminal isn't going to go register a gun. He's going to be perfectly able to get one if he needs it. So it just really harms the ordinary citizen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. During the Clinton years, we heard Janet Reno and others talking about how dangerous the gun culture is. Who is the gun culture exactly, and why are they so dangerous?
Well, I think that they feel that ordinary people having guns is the gun culture. And
ordinary people having guns.
I mean, that to me is, certainly the way I've seen it used in books, it's mm-hmm. people who feel strongly about it, or who hunt. There's this image, almost a stereotype of the redneck with his guns, or the NRA, the so-called gun lobby. And I think that this is really a kind of disservice to ordinary people. I mean, lots of doctors have guns. Most people who have guns are middle-class people, mm-hmm. White-collar people. So that there's been this vilification of people having firearms. And it shows a distrust in ordinary people.
Mm-hmm. So would it be more accurate to use terms such as the crime culture and the culture of violence instead of the gun culture?
It seems that I think that would be a whole lot fairer, because most of the people who are doing the shooting have a long history of violent crime before that. And often in cases of gangs, both the person doing the shooting and the victim have, several serious felonies before that occurs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Professor Malcom, some people feel that gun control is a diversity issue. How do you feel about this?
Could you explain that a bit more? When you say diversity, what you mean by that?
Well, some people are in agreement with it, others are not.
You mean that that it's divisive, right? Oh, it is. I mean, next to abortion, or maybe right alongside abortion, I don't think there's any more passionate issue. And it makes it very hard to write about, because people will take something that, that's history that I have written about, researched, and put down as evidence, and they don't want to look at it because they don't like my conclusion. So you get people who are so passionate that they don't want to hear anything that seems to shake their particular point of view, and that's really unfortunate, because public safety is so central and so important that you want to have the best evidence that you can. And it is an emotional issue because, as you say, as a father or a husband or just as an individual, nothing is more important than being able to protect yourself and other people. So it's one of the closest issues. I mean, Blackstone, the great English jurist, called it the first of your primary rights is your right to personal security.
So where are we going with this? What is your prognosis for the future? What do you think is going to happen in terms of our political leaders accepting this as a way to protect yourself, society maybe lashing out and saying we want to or don't want to? Precisely where do you think it's going?
In this country, I think that they're going to have to change their minds about strict gun control.
And
First of all, because the people who the Brady organizations, the anti-gun organizations. I don't know that they'll change their minds. I won't put that. I think that they are going to have, other people are going to see that that type of approach doesn't work. And really it's what works that counts, what really keeps people safe. That it just disarming law-abiding people is going to leave them vulnerable. It isn't the solution to public safety. It's a nice quick fix. It seems a nice quick fix. But crime and safety issues are a lot more complicated than just whether a person has a gun or doesn't have a gun. And the states are moving in the other direction. Now, 2/3 of them are allowing people to carry concealed weapons. So I think that that politicians are realizing that advocating for strict gun laws is not going to be very popular. There are more than 200 million guns out there in private hands, and yet our violent crime rate's going down. So one would hope that the facts would begin to have some kind of impact, and certainly on the state level they have.
So if your expertise was called in by our political leaders as someone who could come up with some kind of a structure in terms of how this whole thing should be taken care of, how would you structure it? How would you want it legislated?
You ask hard questions. I'm a historian, so I sort of look backwards. But
you have a lot of experience as a historian, and you can probably tap into that, and maybe that somehow could be correlated to the now or the immediate future.
Yes, I think that that permitting people, law-abiding people, to be armed will act as a deterrent to violent crime. And certainly the English case shows that if you take weapons away from people, and there is that lack of a deterrent, that violent crime goes up. So I think as long as there are reasonable regulations about who has the weapons, that you don't have people who've committed serious crimes getting weapons, and some training, that people should be allowed to have it. And what I find amazingly heartening is how very responsible the hundreds of thousands of people have been who have concealed carry certificates. I mean, there were all these fears of a bloodbath, and the bloodbath didn't happen. And in fact, as I said, crime has gone down.
I usually don't bring this up, and I can't help but go back to some of my experiences as a former nightclub singer and master of ceremonies, where I worked with many big stars. And when the show was over, we would leave the club around 3 a.m. in the morning, 3:45. Now you have to remember there were maybe 500 to 2,000 people in the club that night, and they all like to be around big stars, and they're all drinking, and who's taking cocaine or a combination of booze and cocaine and other drugs, and they're feeling pretty high, pretty courageous, and pretty angry in many cases, and they're waiting for these big stars to leave their dressing rooms. And sometimes they can be quite abusive. There wasn't one big star that I worked with, and I won't mention their names, I'm not here to disclose their names, who was not licensed to carry a gun, for fear that they would be harmed.
I'm not really surprised. States that have discretionary laws about who can carry a gun, like New York State and Massachusetts, you often find that the people who are given permission to carry guns are important people or stars or judges or politicians or newspaper publishers who advocate against anyone else having a gun but who get permission themselves. And I think that the discretionary laws tend to be kind of arbitrary. But I'm not surprised because clearly, you know, those are frightening circumstances, and you can't expect everybody to have a policeman or they have a guard who's armed.
Well, exactly. They'll have security of some kind, but they would carry it with them independently in the club late at night because they could be bothered anywhere.
Right.
So, in any case, you do advocate carrying a gun for law-abiding citizens. Well, you feel it's a very strong deterrent, or the only deterrent.
I think it's a very good deterrent. I mean, obviously not everybody needs to do that. And if you're working in a place where you feel there's danger, I think you should have that option, and you shouldn't have to be an important figure or a leading politician in order to have it.
Well, isn't it, I mean, this article here in the Boston Herald this past Sunday, I mean, I would think this is enough to disrupt anyone's life. I mean, this could happen to anyone's child. You get a nut like this who decides he wants to terrorize an apartment house or a housing project or a neighborhood or whatever, and thinks nothing at all of killing a 12-year-old kid, and or it doesn't make any difference who he kills, and we're at the mercy of people like this. So I don't know what has been the response, if I ask you this question, from people in general regarding you advocating carrying guns for law-abiding citizens. What has been the general thrust?
Well,
your response?
I get a lot of fan mail, actually. I get a lot of mail from people who feel that their side of the issue hasn't been articulated, that particularly in the media, or that scholars publishing haven't, that they haven't had a respectable voice. They get kind of shunted aside. So I think most people that I've heard from are sort of grateful that someone's done the research and is ready to speak about it.
What can we expect in the future from Joyce Malcom?
I'm not really sure. I'm sort of mulling over a lot of possible projects, and I've had a lot of response to this book. I'm hoping that that the British will rethink their policies. I'm not sure that they will, but I'm hoping that they will at least give people more scope to defend themselves. I'm very interested in constitutional issues and self-defense, so I'll probably write something more on that subject.
Well, listen, we enjoyed having you on the show. You've done a great job, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
And good luck with your book.
Thank you.
And it's called Guns and Violence. Professor Joyce Malcom of Bentley College. An extraordinary book. I'm Sal Vella. For myself, our guest, and our crew, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.